On the morning of the 19th of September in 1944, just before 8 o'clock, the rolling countryside of Lorraine wore a thick blanket of mist. The air hung heavy and damp around Hill 265, situated outside the small French town of Haraucourt. German tanks, specifically 12 Panthers from the 113th Panzer Brigade, had manoeuvred themselves into what should have been the perfect ambush position. Below them, advancing across terrain that offered little cover, 5 American Sherman tanks rolled forward, their crews apparently oblivious to the steel predators watching from above. The numbers told a story that seemed to write itself before a single shot was fired. Each Panther mounted the fearsome 75mm KWK-42 gun, a weapon capable of punching through enemy armour at distances exceeding 2,000 metres. The frontal protection on these German machines measured 80mm of steel plate, positioned at a 55-degree angle that translated into an effective thickness of 140mm. Against this formidable barrier, the Sherman's own 75mm gun proved essentially worthless, except at ranges so close that approaching them bordered on suicide. The Sherman's frontal armour, a mere 50mm thick, might as well have been paper when facing the Panther's main armament at any practical combat distance. Yet something went catastrophically wrong with what should have been a textbook German victory. By the time the sun reached its midday height, 4 hours after that initial contact, 8 of those 12 Panthers would be reduced to smoking hulks of twisted metal. The 5 Shermans that had appeared so vulnerable would continue their advance without losing a single tank. When darkness finally fell on September 19th, the fields surrounding Haraucourt bore witness to 49 destroyed German tanks, while American casualties remained minimal. The fighting would continue for another 10 days, extending through September 29th, during which period the 4th Armoured Division would obliterate or damage 200 German armoured vehicles, while suffering losses of just 48 of their own machines. This wasn't merely a tactical setback for the Wehrmacht. What transpired around Haraucourt represented the complete dismantling of Germany's final illusion that technical excellence could overcome what they had dismissed as American mechanical mediocrity, backed by nothing more than industrial mass production. The German survivors who lived through those 10 days discovered they hadn't been fighting individual tanks at all. They had encountered an integrated weapons system that fundamentally redefined how modern warfare would be conducted. The German counter-offensive itself had been born from the personal fury of the man in Berlin after American forces broke out of Normandy. Early in September of 1944, as Patton's Third Army raced eastward across France, orders came down demanding an immediate counter-attack to crush the American spearheads and restore German prestige in the West. The newly assembled 113th Panzer Brigade, together with the 111th Panzer Brigade and portions of the 11th Panzer Division, would strike hard into Patton's extended flank in the Lorraine region. Oberst Hans Heinrich Freiherr von Seckendorf commanded the 113th Panzer Brigade, which fielded 45 Panthers and 45 Panzer IV tanks. General Major Heinrich Gunther von Schellendorf-Bronsart led the 111th Panzer Brigade with comparable strength. These formations represented Germany's last operational reserve in the Western Theatre, hastily thrown together and inadequately trained due to crippling fuel shortages, but equipped with tanks that on paper far exceeded anything the Americans could field. The Panther tank embodied everything German engineering philosophy valued. Its 75mm KWK-42 L-70 gun could hurl armour-piercing projectiles at velocities exceeding 1,000 metres per second. At standard combat ranges, this weapon could penetrate 140mm of armour at 1,000 metres distance, sufficient to destroy any Allied tank from the front. The Sherman's M37mm gun, by contrast, could only manage to penetrate 88mm at 500 metres and needed to close to within 100 metres to have any realistic chance against a Panther's frontal protection. German tactical doctrine placed enormous emphasis on the tank duel, those long-range engagements where technical specifications supposedly determined who lived and who died. At the Panzer training schools scattered across Germany, crews spent months perfecting their gunnery skills at extended ranges, studying complex ballistic tables and practicing the precise geometry required for the perfect ambush. The Panther represented the ultimate expression of this entire philosophy. What the Germans massing for their counter-offensive couldn't know was that the Americans had developed a completely different philosophy of armoured warfare, one that rendered individual technical specifications almost meaningless. Colonel Bruce Clark, who had contributed significantly to developing American armoured doctrine at Fort Knox, had written training manuals that emphasized speed, coordination, and the integration of combined arms over individual tank performance. The United States Army's approach stressed that tanks rarely, if ever, fought alone. They operated as components of larger teams that included infantry, artillery, tank destroyers, and air support working in seamless coordination. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Williams Abrams, Jr., commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, personified this philosophy. A West Point graduate from the class of 1936 who had transferred from cavalry to armour, Abrams viewed tank warfare not as duels between individual machines, but as manoeuvre warfare, where speed, aggression, and coordination mattered infinitely more than armour thickness or gun calibre. His battalion had trained relentlessly in combined arms tactics, practicing rapid target acquisition and firing while moving, rather than focusing on the long-range precision shooting that German doctrine emphasized. The 4th Armoured Division had developed very specific tactics for fighting Panthers. They understood that frontal penetration was essentially impossible, so they practiced flanking manoeuvres, smoke deployment, and artillery coordination to suppress German tanks, while Shermans manoeuvred for shots against the thinner side armour. They transformed the Sherman's supposed weaknesses, its lighter weight and superior mechanical reliability, into tactical advantages that enabled rapid manoeuvre and sustained operations that heavier tanks simply couldn't match. The German counter-offensive kicked off on September 18, 1944, with the 113th Panzer Brigade advancing on Aracourt, expecting to sweep aside what reconnaissance had reported as only scattered American forces. German scouts had identified some infantry, a few tank destroyers, perhaps a company of Shermans at most. But American intelligence capabilities far exceeded anything the Germans realized. Ultra-intercepts had revealed the German concentration days before the attack began. Artillery spotting planes tracked every German movement from the air. The Americans knew exactly where the Germans were positioned and where they intended to strike, while the Germans advanced essentially blind into what they believed would be weak resistance. At 8 in the morning on September 19th, 15 Panthers from the 113th Panzer Brigade advanced in textbook formation near the village of Rechicourt. They never saw what hit them. American forward observers had been tracking the German advance for 30 minutes before the first shot was fired. As the Panthers crossed pre-registered grid coordinates that artillery officers had calculated days earlier, 12 batteries of American artillery, representing 144 guns, opened fire simultaneously. The barrage that descended on those German tanks differed from anything they had experienced in previous combat. The Americans had perfected what they called time-on-target fire missions, where shells from multiple batteries, fired at different times from varying distances, arrived on target at precisely the same instant. 3 Panthers were destroyed in the first 60 seconds, not by enemy tanks, but by massed artillery fire. The survivors pushed forward through the maelstrom, shaken by the accuracy and sheer intensity of American indirect fire. As the Panthers occupied Hill 265 overlooking Aracourt, they prepared to spring their ambush on Abrams' approaching Shermans. At 1,200 metres, the perfect range for the Panthers' powerful gun, the Germans opened fire. The first round missed its mark. Before the German gunner could reload, all 5 Shermans fired simultaneously, not at the Panthers themselves, but at the ground directly in front of them, throwing up massive clouds of dust and smoke that completely obscured the German gunner's view. Then the Shermans scattered, using terrain that the Germans hadn't properly reconnoitred, dead ground that allowed covered movement to close the range. The Shermans emerged at ranges under 500 meters, where their guns could actually penetrate the Panthers' 40mm side armor. The engagement demonstrated a critical advantage that German planners had overlooked. The Sherman's hydraulic turret traverse could rotate a full 360 degrees in 15 seconds, while the Panther's manual traverse system needed 60 seconds to complete the same rotation. At close range, this 4-to-1 differential in traverse speed proved absolutely lethal. American crews, trained to load and fire in under 4 seconds, could pump multiple rounds into German tanks before those tanks could even bring their guns to bear on their attackers. One of the best documented individual engagements occurred when Captain William A. Dwight's Sherman platoon encountered German Panthers near the village of Leasey. According to official after-action reports filed with division headquarters, Dwight's gunner, Sergeant Donald Decker, destroyed 4 Panthers in rapid succession at ranges under 800 meters. Decker's own account, preserved in military archives, provides remarkable tactical detail about how the engagement unfolded. His Sherman came around the corner of a small wood, and suddenly there were 3 Panthers in the open, roughly 600 yards distant. The German tanks were traversing their turrets toward the Americans, but the Shermans got their shots off first. Decker put 3 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition into the first Panther's side before the German crew could complete their turret traverse. The second Panther he hit in the rear as the German tank attempted to back up to cover. The third Panther managed to fire once, but the round missed high before Decker's crew knocked it out. This engagement perfectly demonstrated the American advantage in rapid engagement sequences. While German crews followed elaborate firing procedures involving the commander identifying the target, providing range estimation, the gunner adjusting sights, and the loader selecting appropriate ammunition, American crews operated on pure instinct developed through thousands of practice rounds. They sacrificed some long-range accuracy for devastating close-range speed, and at Arakort's typical engagement ranges of 500 to 800 meters, speed mattered infinitely more than precision. On September 20th, the Germans launched a major attack involving elements of both the 113th and 111th Panzer Brigades. Oberst von Zechendorf personally led the assault with 40 Panthers and supporting infantry. The attack initially seemed promising enough. German tanks advanced under cover of morning mist, catching some American outposts by surprise and overrunning forward positions. But the American response demonstrated their systematic superiority across every dimension of warfare. Within minutes of initial contact, every American unit in the entire sector knew the German positions. Radio networks that connected every Sherman tank to higher headquarters enabled instant coordination. Artillery forward observers embedded directly with tank units called in immediate suppressing fire on German concentrations. Most critically, the weather began clearing, allowing intervention by the 19th Tactical Air Command. Major Charles Carpenter, known to American newspapers as Bazooka Charlie, flew an L-4 Grasshopper observation aircraft armed with 6 bazookas that he used to engage German tanks directly. In an interview with Stars and Stripes published on September 25th, Carpenter stated that word must be getting around to watch out for observation planes carrying bazookas. The German tanks saw him coming and began to dodge. He noted that hitting a tank moving 60 miles per hour across a field proved kind of hard. The combination of tanks, artillery, and air power created interlocking fields of fire that trapped German formations in kill zones they couldn't escape. Panthers that stopped to engage Shermans were immediately bracketed by artillery fire. Those that moved to avoid artillery were attacked by fighter bombers diving from above. Those that sought cover in woods or villages were flanked by fast-moving American tank destroyers that could outrun any German tank. September 21st brought catastrophic losses to the German command structure. Oberst von Zechendorf, leading from the front in accordance with German military tradition, was killed when his command Panther was destroyed by American artillery fire. His death immediately paralyzed the 113th Panzer Brigade. Subordinate commanders, trained to follow orders rather than exercise initiative, simply didn't know how to respond to the rapidly changing tactical situation without direction from above. The very next day, September 22nd, General Major von Schellendorf-Bronsart of the 111th Panzer Brigade was also killed in action. The loss of both brigade commanders within 48 hours devastated German command and control across the entire sector. In stark contrast, American doctrine emphasized what they called mission-type orders and command flexibility. When commanders fell in combat, subordinates immediately assumed control without missing a single beat. Captain James Leach, commanding Company B of the 37th Tank Battalion, demonstrated this flexibility perfectly during the September 22nd engagement near the village of Uvalese. When his radio was knocked out by a near miss from German artillery, his platoon leaders continued executing the established plan independently, without needing constant direction. 7 of Leach's Shermans destroyed 17 German tanks while losing only one of their own, a remarkable feat that earned Leach the Distinguished Service Cross. As weather cleared from September 21st through the 23rd, the full weight of American air superiority manifested itself across the battlefield. The 19th Tactical Air Command under Major General Elwood Pete Quesada had perfected close air support to a degree the Germans simply couldn't match. P-47 Thunderbolts carrying bombs and rockets operated in continuous waves over the battlefield, with fresh aircraft arriving as others departed to rearm and refuel. The integration between ground and air forces achieved seamless coordination that seemed almost telepathic. Forward air controllers rode in Sherman tanks, using the exact same maps and grid references as ground units. When tanks encountered strong resistance that couldn't be overcome through maneuver, controllers could vector fighter bombers onto targets within minutes. The P-47 pilots could distinguish friend from foe, even at high speed, because American tanks marked their positions with coloured panels and smoke grenades. German accounts from captured documents describe the absolute terror of constant air attack. Panthers, designed to dominate ground combat, proved utterly helpless against attacks from above. Their 16mm top armour, adequate against artillery airbursts, couldn't withstand direct hits from 500-pound bombs or 5-inch rockets. Even near misses could damage optical equipment, jam turrets, or wound crew members exposed in hatches. The psychological impact exceeded the physical destruction by orders of magnitude. German tank crews couldn't concentrate their forces in daylight without risking immediate air attack. Movement became possible only at night or in bad weather. The constant presence of American aircraft, observation planes, fighters, and bombers created an overwhelming sense of being perpetually watched and targeted by an enemy they couldn't effectively fight back against. The engagement at Uvalese on September 25th demonstrated American tactical superiority at its absolute peak. Company C of the 37th Tank Battalion, commanded by Captain Spencer, faced a German force of approximately 30 tanks advancing across open ground. Spencer had just 7 operational Shermans available for the fight. Rather than meeting the Germans head-on in the kind of frontal engagement they wanted, Spencer executed what can only be described as a tactical masterpiece. He positioned his tanks in hull-down positions behind a low ridge, exposing only their turrets to enemy fire while keeping their more vulnerable hulls protected by terrain. As the Germans advanced across the open ground, Spencer's tanks opened fire, hitting several Panthers before the Germans could identify where the fire was coming from. When the Germans finally located the American positions and began returning fire, Spencer's tanks reversed down the slope into complete cover. The Germans, thinking they had driven off the American tanks, continued their advance. The moment they crossed the ridge where Spencer's tanks had been positioned, they found themselves silhouetted against the skyline, while Spencer's Shermans, having moved to new positions, engaged them from the flank at close range. The results were devastating. 17 German tanks destroyed, 8 damaged and forced to withdraw. American losses consisted of 1 Sherman damaged, which was quickly repaired and returned to service. By September 24th, the battle was revealing fundamental flaws in German armoured doctrine that went far beyond mere tactical mistakes. The Panther, for all its undeniable technical superiority on paper, suffered from crippling mechanical problems that multiplied exponentially under actual combat conditions. The United States Army's Ballistic Research Laboratory would later document that in 30 analysed engagements from the battle, Shermans achieved a kill ratio of 3.6 to 1 over Panthers, not through superior firepower, but through dramatically superior availability and reliability. The Panthers' final drive, overstressed by the tank's 45-ton weight, failed with alarming frequency. Transmissions originally designed for a lighter vehicle simply couldn't handle the sustained strain of combat operations. The interleaved road wheel system, while providing excellent weight distribution for cross-country mobility, became clogged with mud in Lorraine's wet autumn terrain. When mud froze overnight, which happened frequently as temperatures dropped, it could immobilize tanks completely, requiring hours of work with blowtorches to free the frozen running gear. In stark contrast, the Sherman's mechanical simplicity proved to be its greatest strategic asset. The tank could run for hundreds of miles between major maintenance intervals. Track tension could be adjusted in minutes by any competent crew. Engines could be swapped out and replaced in 4 hours by a well-trained maintenance crew. Transmissions, designed with plenty of reserve strength for the Sherman's 33-ton weight, rarely failed even under sustained combat stress. When components did break, standardized parts meant quick replacement from readily available supply stocks. American maintenance units performed what seemed like miracles to German observers. The 37th Tank Battalion's maintenance platoon, led by experienced non-commissioned officers trained at Fort Knox, kept 90% of their Shermans operational throughout the entire battle. German units were fortunate to maintain 50% readiness under the same conditions. By September 26th, more Panthers sat disabled by mechanical failure than had been knocked out by enemy action. The Battle of Aracourt was ultimately decided by logistics rather than tactics or technology. Both armies faced severe fuel shortages as supply lines stretched back hundreds of miles to rear areas, but the American response differed fundamentally from the German situation. General Patton's Third Army operated under strict fuel rationing that limited operations. Armoured divisions received 25,000 gallons daily when 75,000 would have been optimal for unrestricted operations. Yet this limitation sparked American innovation rather than paralysis. The Red Ball Express, that legendary truck convoy system, moved 12,000 tons of supplies daily over routes exceeding 300 miles in length. When official supply allocations proved insufficient, Patton authorized what might charitably be called unauthorized fuel acquisition. Units sent foraging parties to requisition fuel from other commands, to intercept supply trucks heading elsewhere, to make deals with French civilians who had hoarded German fuel stocks. The German supply situation verged on catastrophic. The hastily formed panzer brigades had been promised adequate fuel and ammunition to sustain offensive operations, but reality proved brutally different. Panthers consumed fuel at 2.5 gallons per mile cross-country, meaning a full 200-gallon tank provided only 80 miles of operational range. With supply lines under constant air attack and fuel production facilities crippled by strategic bombing, German tanks often sat immobile for days, waiting for fuel deliveries that never arrived. Ammunition posed another insurmountable crisis. American Shermans carried a mixed load of armor-piercing, high-explosive and white phosphorus rounds, allowing crews to effectively engage whatever targets they encountered. Artillery ammunition flowed continuously forward from supply depots in Normandy. German Panthers, primarily supplied with armor-piercing rounds optimized for tank versus tank combat, couldn't effectively engage infantry or soft-skinned vehicles. When ammunition stocks ran low, German crews had absolutely no ability to resupply under combat conditions. The devastating effect of American artillery reached its absolute peak on September 26th, when the Germans attempted another major assault. The 4th Armoured Division's artillery, reinforced by corps-level assets brought forward specifically for this battle, could mass the fire of over 150 guns on a single target within minutes of a fire request being transmitted. The American Fire Direction Center system represented a genuine revolution in artillery employment that the Germans couldn't match. Forward observers equipped with radios and precise maps could call for fire using simple grid coordinates. Fire direction centers, using pre-calculated firing data and mechanical computers, could translate observer requests into firing commands in seconds rather than minutes. Multiple batteries could engage the same target simultaneously, with shells timed to arrive on target at the exact same instant through precise calculation of time of flight from different distances. German forces, accustomed to Eastern Front warfare where artillery was often scarce and poorly coordinated, found themselves psychologically shattered by the sheer volume and terrifying accuracy of American fire. Every German troop concentration was immediately bracketed by artillery once spotted. Every assembly area used to mass forces for attack was saturated with high explosive shells. Movement in daylight invited immediate bombardment that seemed to materialize from nowhere. The official divisional history records that on September 26th alone, American artillery fired over 15,000 rounds in support of the 4th Armored Division's operations. German artillery, limited to a few dozen guns with minimal ammunition reserves, could manage only sporadic counter-battery fire that American sound-ranging equipment quickly located and suppressed with overwhelming counter-fire. The Battle of Aracourt also demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of American tank destroyer doctrine. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M18 Hellcats mounting 76mm guns, operated according to the seek, strike, and destroy philosophy developed at Camp Hood, Texas. The M18 Hellcat represented the opposite design philosophy from the Panther tank in almost every respect. Where the Panther emphasized armor protection and firepower, the M18 prioritized speed and mobility above all else. With a top speed of 55 miles per hour, making it the fastest tracked vehicle of the entire Second World War, and a powerful 76mm gun capable of penetrating most German armor from the side or rear, Hellcats could appear seemingly from nowhere, devastate enemy formations, and disappear before the Germans could respond effectively. Lieutenant James Leiper's platoon of M18 executed a textbook tank destroyer action on September 23rd. Concealed in a tree line overlooking a road, they allowed an entire column of German tanks to pass their position, then engaged from the rear where armor was thinnest and most vulnerable. In 12 minutes of sustained firing, Leiper's platoon destroyed 5 Panthers and 3 Panzer Pfeifors before relocating to avoid counterfire. Not a single M18 was hit during the engagement. The tank destroyer contribution went far beyond direct kill tallies. Their mere presence on the battlefield forced German tanks to constantly watch their flanks and rear, slowing advances and disrupting tight formations. The incredible speed of the M18 meant they could respond to breakthrough threats faster than German reserves could exploit any tactical success they achieved. By the battle's end, the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion claimed 39 confirmed kills against just 4 M18s lost. The battle's climax arrived on September 29th when General Hasso von Manteuffel, one of Germany's most capable and experienced panzer commanders, personally arrived to lead what would be the last major German assault of the entire battle. Manteuffel had reached the front on September 27th to assume command of the shattered brigades, bringing his considerable tactical expertise and personal leadership to bear on a nearly hopeless situation. Manteuffel's attack commenced at 6 in the morning with the last operational Panthers, approximately 30 tanks, advancing in conjunction with infantry from the 11th Panzer Division. The assault demonstrated professional tactical competence despite overwhelming material disadvantages, using terrain effectively and maintaining reasonably good coordination between tanks and infantry despite communication difficulties. But the American response proved utterly overwhelming. Colonel Bruce Clark, commanding Combat Command A of the 4th Armoured Division, had anticipated the attack location and timing through intelligence intercepts decoded days earlier. American tanks sat positioned in carefully prepared defensive positions, with pre-planned artillery concentrations already calculated for likely German approach routes. As German forces advanced into what they thought was lightly defended terrain, they entered a carefully prepared kill zone that had been designed specifically to destroy them. The systematic destruction that followed was methodical and terrifying in its efficiency. Artillery fire separated German infantry from their tank support, leaving the tanks vulnerable and the infantry exposed. Tank destroyers engaged German armour from the flanks, while Shermans held the centre and fixed the German advance. As morning fog lifted and visibility improved, P-47 Thunderbolts arrived in strength, adding their considerable firepower to the maelstrom of fire descending on the trapped German formation. By noon, Manteuffel's attack had failed completely and catastrophically. 22 German tanks lay destroyed or abandoned across the battlefield. The remaining forces, what little survived, withdrew in disorder toward the German border. The Battle of Aracourt was effectively over. When fighting finally ended on September 29, 1944, the results were nothing short of staggering. From an initial strength of 262 tanks and assault guns committed to the offensive, German forces retained only 62 operational vehicles by battle's end, representing a loss rate of 76%. The 113th Panzer Brigade had effectively ceased to exist as a combat-effective formation. The 111th Panzer Brigade was similarly devastated. The 11th Panzer Division, one of the Wehrmacht's most veteran and experienced formations, was reduced to barely regiment strength. American losses, while certainly not insignificant, proved far lighter than German casualties. The 4th Armoured Division lost 48 tanks during September 1944 as a whole, with 25 tanks and 7 tank destroyers lost specifically during the Aracourt battles. Most damaged American tanks were quickly repaired by maintenance units and returned to combat service within days. Crew casualties remained relatively low due to the Shermans' superior escape hatches and internal layout that facilitated quick evacuation when tanks were hit. The kill ratio, approximately 3.6 to 1 in favour of American forces, completely contradicted everything German armoured doctrine predicted would happen. The Panther, superior in both armour protection and firepower specifications, had been decisively defeated by supposedly inferior opponents. But the victory hadn't come through tank versus tank combat fought on German terms. It came through superior integration of combined arms, better tactical flexibility, superior logistics infrastructure, and overwhelming artillery and air support that German forces simply couldn't match. The United States Army's immediate after-action analysis of Aracourt provided crucial insights that would influence armoured warfare doctrine for decades to come. The Armoured Force Board at Fort Knox compiled extraordinarily detailed reports from every participating unit, creating a comprehensive picture of what modern armoured warfare actually required for success beyond simple technical specifications. First and foremost, the battle proved conclusively that technical specifications alone didn't determine combat outcomes in any meaningful way. The Panther's superior gun and armour meant absolutely nothing when American forces simply refused to fight on German terms. By using massed artillery to suppress German tanks, aircraft to attack from above where armour was thinnest, and rapid manoeuvre to strike from flanks and rear, American forces systematically negated every German technical advantage. Second, mechanical reliability proved infinitely more important than maximum performance specifications. A Sherman tank that could fight every single day was worth vastly more than a Panther that spent half its time deadlined for maintenance. The ability to sustain continuous operations, to keep tanks running and fighting day after day without pause, multiplied combat power in ways that armour thickness measurements couldn't possibly match. Third, comprehensive crew training and tactical flexibility trumped individual heroics or technical prowess every single time. American tank crews, products of standardized training programs at Fort Knox, operated with consistent institutional competence across the board. They could perform any role within the tank crew, coordinate instinctively with other supporting arms, and adapt rapidly to changing battlefield situations without requiring detailed orders from higher headquarters. German crews, increasingly inexperienced due to catastrophic losses and hasty replacement training programs, simply couldn't match this level of institutional competence. Fourth, logistics ultimately determined what strategic and operational possibilities even existed. The American ability to supply adequate fuel, ammunition, and spare parts, even at the end of a 400-mile supply line, enabled continuous offensive operations. German forces, completely unable to maintain adequate supply flow forward, saw their tactical options progressively constrained until mechanical immobility meant inevitable defeat. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, whose personal tactical leadership had proven decisive throughout the entire battle, provided a remarkably comprehensive assessment in his after-action report submitted to division headquarters. Abrams emphasized that victory came not from any single factor, but from the systematic application of combined arms doctrine across every dimension of warfare. His 37th Tank Battalion had demonstrated conclusively that aggressive offensive action, properly supported by artillery and air power, could defeat technically superior opponents through superior coordination and tempo. Abrams would later rise to become Chief of Staff of the United States Army, and his experiences at Aracourt would directly influence American armored doctrine throughout the entire Cold War period. The M1 Abrams tank, named in his honor decades later, embodied lessons learned at Aracourt by emphasizing reliability, crew survivability, and systems integration over pure technical performance specifications. On the German side, General Hasso von Manteuffel provided perhaps the most brutally honest assessment of what had transpired. In post-war interrogations conducted by American intelligence officers, Manteuffel stated bluntly that Aracourt demonstrated the complete bankruptcy of traditional German tactical doctrine. The Wehrmacht's long-standing emphasis on technical superiority and individual warrior prowess had proven utterly inadequate when confronted with American systematic warfare. The Americans, Manteuffel observed, had essentially industrialized combat itself, turning warfare into a production process where superior organization and logistics guaranteed victory regardless of individual weapon performance. German forces had challenged this system and been systematically ground down by it. The Battle of Aracourt represented an absolute triumph of American intelligence gathering and processing capabilities. Ultra-intercepts had provided strategic warning of German force concentration and attack intentions days before the offensive began. Tactical reconnaissance, conducted continuously by armoured cavalry units and light observation aircraft, provided real-time updates on German positions and movements throughout the battle. The integration of intelligence from multiple different sources created unprecedented battlefield awareness that gave American commanders an overwhelming information advantage. Colonel Oscar Koch, serving as G2 intelligence officer for Patton's Third Army, had developed genuinely innovative techniques for intelligence fusion. His staff systematically correlated ultra-intercepts with aerial reconnaissance photographs, prisoner interrogation reports, and captured documents to create comprehensive enemy assessments that were remarkably accurate. At Aracourt, American commanders frequently knew German intentions and dispositions before German subordinate unit commanders received their own orders through their slower communication systems. This intelligence advantage multiplied American combat power exponentially. Knowing where Germans would attack enabled optimal positioning of reserves to meet those attacks. Understanding German fuel shortages enabled American tactics that deliberately forced excessive maneuvering that burned precious fuel. Awareness of pervasive German mechanical problems suggested aggressive pursuit operations that prevented recovery and maintenance of damaged vehicles. The unglamorous but absolutely crucial role of maintenance units deserves special recognition that it rarely receives in popular histories. The 126th Ordnance Maintenance Battalion, directly supporting the 4th Armoured Division, performed mechanical miracles throughout the entire battle. Operating from forward positions that occasionally came under German artillery fire, maintenance teams kept American armour running at operational rates that seemed impossible to German observers. Master Sergeant John Faulkner, a maintenance platoon sergeant, described the entire system in a 1945 interview with Yank magazine. They had developed assembly line maintenance procedures down to an absolute science. Track repair required 1 hour. Complete engine swaps took 4 hours. Transmission replacement needed 6 hours from start to finish. They maintained spare parts stockpiled at company, battalion, and division level. If any component broke, they could fix it or replace it entirely within 1 day maximum. This extraordinary maintenance capability meant that tanks damaged on Monday could be fighting again by Wednesday morning. German Panthers, requiring specialized tools and increasingly scarce spare parts that had to come from Germany itself, might remain disabled for weeks, assuming they could even be recovered from the battlefield under constant American artillery and air attack. Combat effectiveness depended significantly on medical support capabilities, and here too the Americans held absolutely decisive advantages over their opponents. The 4th Armoured Division's medical battalion could process casualties all the way from initial collection point to surgery within 1 hour, the so-called golden hour that medical research had proven dramatically improved survival rates for serious wounds. Tank casualties presented unique medical challenges that required specialized responses. Burns from flaming fuel and white phosphorus, traumatic amputations from shell fragments, and blast injuries from ammunition explosions all required immediate specialist care to prevent death. American medical doctrine emphasized positioning surgical hospitals far forward with fully trained specialists available. Plasma for blood volume replacement, morphine for pain management, and sulfur drugs for infection control were all available at company level rather than requiring evacuation to rear areas. The psychological impact of comprehensive medical support simply cannot be overstated. American tankers fought aggressively knowing that wounds weren't automatic death sentences. German tankers, painfully aware that medical support was minimal at best and evacuation highly uncertain under American air superiority, fought more cautiously to avoid being wounded. This difference in mental approach translated directly into tactical advantage for American forces. Weather conditions played a crucial but complex role throughout the Battle of Aracourt. The morning fog that shrouded the battlefield from September 18th through 21st initially seemed to favour German offensive operations, masking their approach routes and negating American advantages in artillery observation and air support. But that same fog also completely eliminated the Panthers' long-range gunnery advantage, forcing combat at close ranges where Shermans could effectively penetrate German side armour. When weather finally cleared from September 21st through the 23rd, American advantages multiplied dramatically across every dimension of warfare. Clear skies brought absolutely overwhelming air support from fighter bombers that German anti-aircraft defences couldn't effectively counter. Good visibility enabled artillery observers to engage distant targets with precision fire. The autumn sun dried muddy terrain somewhat, improving mobility for the lighter Shermans, while Panthers continued struggling with their heavier ground pressure that made them more susceptible to bogging down. Rain returned from September 24th through the 26th, creating thick mud that particularly affected German operations in devastating ways. The Panthers' interleaved road wheels, designed to optimally distribute the tank's considerable weight, became thoroughly clogged with mud that then froze solid overnight as temperatures dropped. Several Panthers were completely immobilized, not by any combat damage whatsoever, but by frozen mud literally locking their running gear in place. Shermans, with much simpler track systems and lighter weight, could usually break free using their own engine power or with quick assistance from maintenance crews. American signal communication superiority provided yet another decisive advantage that force multiplied every other American strength. The 4th Armoured Division operated multiple radio networks simultaneously throughout the battle. command networks, fire support networks, logistics networks, and dedicated air support networks. Every single Sherman tank carried 2 radios, allowing crews to monitor multiple frequencies and communicate across different networks as tactical situations required. The SCR-528 radio set installed in American tanks provided reliable voice communication at ranges exceeding 10 miles under most terrain conditions. The companion SCR-506 radio allowed direct communication with supporting artillery and air assets. These frequency-modulated radios, highly resistant to interference and enemy interception, enabled secure tactical coordination that German forces simply couldn't match with their inferior equipment. German communications capabilities, dependent on fewer radios with significantly shorter operational ranges, failed frequently during sustained combat operations. The Fu-5 radio set installed in most Panthers had a practical field range of only 2 miles under good conditions. When command tanks were destroyed, which American gunners deliberately prioritized as high-value targets, subordinate units often lost communication entirely with higher headquarters. This communications breakdown accelerated German tactical collapse as units couldn't coordinate responses to American attacks. The Battle of Aracourt comprehensively validated the massive American investment in training infrastructure that had been built up since the pre-war period. Fort Knox, home of the Armored Force School, had developed what was arguably the world's most comprehensive and effective tank crew training program. Every single American tanker who fought at Aracourt had completed an intensive training pipeline that included 17 weeks of basic and advanced individual training, 13 weeks of crew collective training focused on teamwork, 8 weeks of unit-level combined arms training with infantry and artillery, extensive live-fire exercises with full ammunition allocations rarely available to other armies, and thorough maintenance training on every tank component and system. This standardized training created what can only be described as institutional excellence across the force. Any American tank crew could operate effectively alongside any other crew, knowing that procedures and tactics were completely consistent. The loss of individual crew members, while certainly tragic, didn't eliminate unit effectiveness because cross-training meant every crew member could perform multiple roles within the tank. German training had essentially collapsed by 1944 under the overwhelming pressure of catastrophic losses and desperate need for replacements. Chronic fuel shortages meant minimal driving practice for new crews. Ammunition shortages severely limited gunnery training opportunities. The complex Panther tank required extensive training that simply couldn't be provided during the hasty formation of new units to replace destroyed formations. Many German tankers at Aracourt had accumulated less than 100 hours of actual tank experience compared to American crews averaging over 1,000 hours of training time. Aracourt must be understood within the broader strategic situation facing Germany in September 1944. The Wehrmacht was simultaneously collapsing on virtually every front. Soviet forces had completely destroyed Army Group Center during Operation Bagration and were rapidly approaching German borders from the east. Allied forces had liberated France and Belgium and were pushing toward Germany's western frontier. Strategic bombing had systematically devastated German industrial production capacity. Romania had switched sides, completely cutting off Germany's access to crucial oil supplies that couldn't be replaced. The counter-offensive at Aracourt represented one of Germany's absolute last attempts to regain any kind of operational initiative in the Western theatre. Its comprehensive failure meant that Germany could no longer mount significant offensive operations anywhere. The destruction of irreplaceable Panthers and increasingly scarce experienced crews accelerated German military collapse across all theatres. For the Americans, Aracourt provided comprehensive validation of their entire approach to modern warfare. The combination of industrial mass production, systematic training programs, and flexible combined arms tactics had proven decisively superior to German emphasis on technical quality and rigid doctrine. The battle demonstrated conclusively that American military methods could defeat any enemy anywhere, a lesson that would profoundly influence United States military doctrine throughout the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. The Battle of Aracourt simply cannot be properly understood without recognizing the industrial base that made American victory not just possible but essentially inevitable. The Detroit Tank Arsenal, also known as the Fisher Tank Arsenal, perfectly embodied American production philosophy that prioritized quantity and reliability over maximum individual performance. Built in just 6 months through heroic construction efforts, the facility could produce 1,000 tanks monthly by 1944. The production system emphasized absolute standardization and proven reliability over constant pursuit of maximum performance specifications. Every Sherman used completely interchangeable parts, regardless of which factory produced it. Every transmission was identical. Every engine could be swapped with any other. This comprehensive standardization meant that maintenance units could stock spare parts, knowing with certainty they would fit any vehicle in the fleet. German production, by contrast, suffered catastrophically from constant modifications and supposed improvements that severely complicated both manufacturing and field maintenance. Panthers produced at different factories or during different production runs might have fundamentally incompatible parts that couldn't be cross-substituted. The endless pursuit of technical perfection created logistical nightmares that multiplied exponentially as Germany's industrial base crumbled under relentless strategic bombing. By September 1944, American factories were producing approximately 2,000 Shermans monthly, compared to German production of fewer than 400 Panthers total across all factories. This 5-to-1 production ratio, combined with dramatically superior reliability that multiplied effective strength, created overwhelming numerical superiority at every tactical level. At Aracourt, local American numerical superiority frequently exceeded 3-to-1 despite theoretical German force concentration in the sector. Beyond statistics and tactical analysis lies the fundamental human reality of armoured combat that's often overlooked in technical discussions. Tank warfare was absolutely not the clean mechanical duel often portrayed in popular culture, but rather a terrifying experience of fire, explosion, and death that tested human courage to its absolute limits. The crews who fought at Aracourt, American and German alike, displayed extraordinary personal courage in conditions of extreme mortal danger. The Sherman, despite its tactical victories, remained desperately vulnerable to catastrophic destruction when penetrated. A Panther's armor-piercing shell punching through a Sherman's hull could instantly ignite stored ammunition, creating an inferno that gave crews perhaps seconds to escape if they were lucky. The tank's grim nickname among crews, Ronson, after the cigarette lighter famously advertised as lighting first time every time, reflected this deadly vulnerability that every Sherman crewman lived with. German tankers faced equally horrific dangers in their supposedly superior vehicles. Panthers struck by white phosphorus shells filled instantly with toxic smoke and flame. Crews had to make split-second choices between staying inside and suffocating or evacuating into machine gun fire that often cut down escaping tankers. Tank commanders, who typically fought with open hatches for better visibility and situational awareness, proved particularly vulnerable to artillery airburst rounds that sprayed deadly shrapnel directly into turrets. The wounded faced agonizing experiences that would haunt survivors for life. Burns were tragically common from contact with superheated metal, flaming fuel, or burning white phosphorus that couldn't be extinguished. Traumatic amputations from shell fragments occurred with terrible frequency. Concussion from near misses could cause permanent traumatic brain injury without leaving any visible external wounds. Yet amid this industrial-scale horror, remarkable moments of shared humanity emerged that transcended the hatred propaganda tried to instill. American medics treated German wounded with the same care they provided their own casualties. Tank crews from both sides risked their own lives to extract enemy tankers from burning vehicles that were about to explode. Local French civilians, despite suffering through 4 years of brutal German occupation, frequently provided medical aid and shelter to wounded soldiers of both armies. The Battle of Aracourt generated numerous German prisoners who provided enormously valuable intelligence through systematic interrogation. These interrogations, conducted according to strict Geneva Convention protocols, revealed the true depth of German supply problems and plummeting morale. Captured tank crews described fuel shortages so severe they limited tactical options to essentially defensive positions. They reported receiving only the most basic training due to fuel conservation requirements. They complained bitterly about mechanical problems that left roughly half their tanks non-operational, even before any combat damage. Most significantly for American intelligence analysis, German prisoners expressed genuine shock at American material superiority they had never expected to encounter. The sheer volume of artillery fire, the constant presence of air attacks, the seemingly unlimited supply of ammunition and replacement vehicles, all combined to create psychological effects that went far beyond mere physical destruction of equipment. American treatment of prisoners consistently followed strict protocols that frequently surprised Germans conditioned by years of propaganda about American barbarism and incompetence. Prisoners received proper medical treatment for their wounds, adequate food and water, and complete protection from any harm or abuse. This unexpectedly humane treatment, contrasting so sharply with Nazi propaganda warnings, often loosened tongues considerably during subsequent interrogation sessions. The intelligence gained from systematic prisoner interrogation provided immediate tactical advantages throughout the continuing battle. Knowing precise German fuel status allowed timing attacks for moments when German tanks physically couldn't maneuver to respond. Understanding the full extent of mechanical problems suggested aggressive pursuit operations that prevented any maintenance or recovery. Awareness of command casualties at specific units enabled focused exploitation of resulting leadership voids and coordination breakdowns. The Battle of Aricourt absolutely devastated the French countryside surrounding this previously obscure Lorraine town. French civilians, who had somehow endured 4 long years of German occupation, suddenly found themselves trapped between opposing armies during their liberation. The mayor of Aricourt, speaking to American reporters immediately after the battle ended, described the terrifying experience in vivid terms. The noise proved almost unbearable, he recalled. Shells exploding constantly in every direction, tanks firing their guns at all hours, aircraft roaring overhead without pause. Many houses were completely destroyed by fire and explosives. But despite the destruction and danger, they knew this suffering meant liberation was finally coming. When they saw the burnt-out German tanks littering the fields, they knew with certainty the Americans had won. Civilian casualties, while never precisely documented in official records, were certainly significant. Artillery fire and tank combat didn't distinguish between legitimate military targets and civilian homes in the battle zone. The town of Aricourt itself changed hands several times as fighting surged back and forth, each transition bringing fresh destruction. Yet most surviving civilians, when interviewed during post-war reconstruction, expressed profound gratitude for liberation, despite the terrible price paid. French resistance members provided absolutely crucial intelligence to American forces throughout the battle. They continuously reported German movements through areas they knew intimately, identified hidden supply dumps Germans thought were secret, and guided American units through local terrain that maps couldn't adequately show. This civilian intelligence network, carefully built and maintained over 4 years of occupation, gave Americans tactical advantages that map reconnaissance and aerial photography simply couldn't provide. The Battle of Aricourt's influence extended far beyond its immediate tactical success in defeating a German counter-offensive. The battle rapidly became required study material at the United States Army's Command and General Staff College, where future officers would spend days analyzing its lessons. The masterful integration of combined arms demonstrated at Aricourt became the fundamental template for American military operations for generations. The battle profoundly influenced subsequent tank development philosophy in divergent directions. While the Soviets and Germans continued emphasizing ever heavier tanks mounting ever larger guns, Americans deliberately focused on proven reliability, comprehensive standardization and seamless systems integration, rather than pursuing maximum technical specifications. The M26 Pershing heavy tank and later M48 Patton medium tank explicitly prioritized these operational characteristics over pure technical performance measurements. NATO doctrine throughout the entire Cold War explicitly drew upon lessons from Aracourt for planning defense against potentially overwhelming Soviet armored superiority. The fundamental concept of using massed artillery, overwhelming air power, and rapid maneuver to defeat technically superior but numerically larger forces came directly from the 4th Armoured Division's stunning success against German Panthers. Modern military historians increasingly consider Aracourt a genuine watershed moment in the evolution of armoured warfare, representing the critical transition point where industrial-age mass-production warfare began giving way to information-age integrated network warfare. The American ability to seamlessly coordinate multiple different weapons systems in real time through superior communications and intelligence presaged modern network-centric warfare concepts, where information superiority multiplies combat power far beyond mere numbers of platforms. Post-war German military studies of Aracourt proved brutally honest in their self-criticism. The Bundeswehr's historical section, analyzing the battle during the 1950s, concluded that German forces had comprehensively failed at literally every level of warfare: strategic, operational, and tactical. Strategically, committing the last operational armoured reserves to a secondary theatre while the Eastern Front collapsed showed catastrophically flawed resource allocation. Operationally, the hasty assembly of panzer brigades without adequate training, sustainable logistics, or proper combined arms support practically guaranteed failure before operations even began. Tactically, rigid adherence to outdated long-range tank combat doctrine completely ignored battlefield realities that demanded flexibility and adaptation. German veterans interviewed during the 1960s consistently emphasized their profound shock at actual American capabilities they encountered. They had genuinely expected to face an army that relied primarily on overwhelming material superiority, but remained tactically inferior to German professionalism. Instead, they encountered forces that excelled in absolutely every aspect of modern warfare: sophisticated tactics, integrated technology, sustainable logistics, and inspired leadership at all levels. Over subsequent decades, the Battle of Aracourt has acquired mythic dimensions in popular culture that sometimes obscure the actual historical reality. The dramatic image of 5 Shermans defeating dozens of Panthers, while certainly based on specific documented engagements, shouldn't obscure the broader truth that American victory came through systematic superiority across every dimension rather than individual heroics or lucky circumstances. The Sherman tank, often unfairly disparaged in popular histories focused on technical specifications, proved conclusively at Aracourt that wars are ultimately won by complete weapon systems rather than individual weapons in isolation. The Panther, for all its undeniable technical excellence in armor and firepower, ultimately failed because it was merely a tank operating in a vacuum. The Sherman succeeded precisely because it functioned as an integral component of a comprehensive combined arms team that included responsive artillery, overwhelming air support, coordinated infantry, and sustainable logistics. The battle demonstrated with crystal clarity that military effectiveness fundamentally comes from successful synthesis of multiple diverse factors, including training quality, tactical doctrine, logistics capacity, technological integration, and inspired leadership. No single element, regardless of how superior it might be in isolation, can possibly overcome systematic disadvantage across all other critical areas. This lesson remains profoundly relevant as modern militaries continuously struggle to balance technological advancement against systemic capability development. The Battle of Aracourt from September 18th through 29th, 1944, ultimately stands as far more than merely another tactical victory in a long war. It represented comprehensive validation of American military philosophy painstakingly developed throughout the interwar period, the revolutionary idea that industrial democracy's inherent strengths could be systematically translated into decisive military superiority through relentless application of integrated combined arms warfare. German forces arrived at Aracourt genuinely confident in their technical superiority and proven tactical doctrine. The Panther tank, with its powerful gun and thick armor, seemed to absolutely guarantee success against lighter American Shermans. German tank crews, proud inheritors of Prussian military traditions stretching back centuries, sincerely believed their superior warrior skills would inevitably overcome American material abundance. They discovered instead that modern warfare had evolved far beyond their doctrinal understanding. The Americans weren't fighting traditional tank duels at all. They were conducting comprehensively integrated operations where tanks served merely as one component among many. Artillery firepower, air superiority, signals intelligence, sustainable logistics, and reliable communications combined to create overwhelming advantages that no amount of armor thickness could possibly overcome. The shocked German survivors who managed to escape carried back a fundamental truth that no amount of propaganda could counter or obscure. They had directly encountered a revolutionary form of warfare they simply couldn't match. Not because American tanks were individually better, which they demonstrably weren't. Not because American soldiers were personally braver, since courage proved universal among fighting men. But because the Americans had created and perfected an entire system of warfare that turned every possible advantage into exponentially multiplied combat power. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams and his 37th Tank Battalion had demonstrated conclusively that victory in modern industrialized warfare came not from individual technical superiority, but from systematic integration of all combat elements. Those 5 Shermans that appeared like easy prey to German Panthers that foggy September morning had supporting them the full weight of American industrial democracy, a comprehensive force that would grind Nazi Germany into unconditional surrender within just 8 more months. At Aracourt, German tankers learned what their captured comrades in prisoner-of-war camps were simultaneously discovering across Europe. American strength ultimately lay not in any single weapon or tactical innovation, but in the fundamental ability to organize, supply, and coordinate overwhelming force precisely at the point of decision. They had challenged what was called the arsenal of democracy, and discovered it represented not merely an arsenal of weapons, but rather an entire comprehensive system of warfare they proved powerless to defeat. The fields around Aracourt, littered with burned-out Panther hulks, told the complete story more eloquently than any after-action report. Technical superiority had directly confronted systematic superiority, and systematic superiority had won decisively. The German tankers, fortunate enough to survive, carried this bitter lesson back to a rapidly crumbling Reich. They had personally witnessed the future of warfare, and that future was unquestionably American.